Good Friday morning, friends. Welcome back for another episode of the Finding God in the Dark podcast. My name is Don,
And my name is Jonathan.
and today we are looking at the 2025 Danny Boyle film, right? Danny Boyle produced it, I think.
Produced it and wrote it, I think.
Yeah, produced and wrote. He did not direct it, but this is the fourth in the 28 series. 28 years later, The Bone Temple.
Mhm.
Starring Ralph Fiennes, um,
Yeah.
with I guess you'll call it a cameo. Oh, spoiler alert! Cameo at the end, Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but um, this is a weird movie. Maybe that's not the perfect word for it. I get the sense this film has an identity crisis. Like it does not know what it wants to be. It's almost like equal parts folk horror, zombie movie, body horror, psychological thriller, and I don't think it fully succeeds at any of them.
Yeah.
Um, which makes it a little bit of a hard watch.
Yeah. And I would,
Particularly,
I'm sorry.
well, I just want to say, like, particularly for those who, if you follow us and you go, oh, there's a film, let me go watch that. Now that I've heard these guys talk about it, if you don't like body horror type of films, do not go and see this. Do not go out of your way to watch this film. There's not a lot of it, but what is in there is terribly graphic.
Yeah.
Um,
I thought it was a kind of radical shift from the last movie.
yes.
And,
The
like the
last film was more of an adventure type of film,
it was an
really.
adventure. And I thought it had some deeply kind of philosophical dimensions to it.
Hmm.
And this one, I would argue for me at least, the best parts of this movie were undercooked. I would have liked to see more time with uh, Ian, the doctor, and
Hmm.
Samson.
And Samson, right?
I would have liked to see more time with Ian struggling with being alone. Um, you know, the kind of the metaphysical stuff in this movie about what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alone? What does it mean to be a community?
Hmm.
That stuff I thought was really interesting, but it wasn't even the majority of the film.
They really didn't explore it much, no,
No.
not much at all. And you're right. I think particularly the relationship, that whole dynamic between Ian as the doctor looking kind of for a cure
Yeah.
for the plague, and maybe finding one, and with Samson and changing his whole perspective. That was so much more interesting than the whole storyline with the Jimmies.
Yeah.
And that side of the story was all of the horror part, really.
Well, and
you know
I think that for
Almost
me,
all.
I think for me, when I watch a movie and I'm like, hey, can you go back? Can you go back to that last part? Can you go back to those last characters? Can I spend more time with them?
Hmm.
Usually I feel like those movies I kind of feel at the end did not work as well. And that's how I felt the entire time. I'm like, I want to go back to the doctor. Or I was actually hoping that the movie would have kind of an ending where the doctor rescued the two kids and they kind of started to try to work through things together or find his father or whatever. Like, I was kind of disappointed that, like, you didn't have this moment where they could kind of reconnect. And, I was kind of looking forward to that at piece as well.
Yeah. I mean, there was really just sort of that one moment of realization that turned the whole kind of ending storyline where, the Jimmies and Dr. Ian kind of come together,
Yeah.
and it put a whole twist on that turned it very sour, I felt.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think this is an easy film to pick apart, and I would say knowing that you don't particularly enjoy horror films,
Yeah.
this is probably the kind of horror film that would create that in people that
Yes.
they'd see this and go, maybe I don't really like horror movies,
Yeah.
you know?
Again, we're giving this away, but if you're watching this, spoiler.
Yeah,
But I don't know how you feel. Um, I don't need to see people flayed.
right.
You
No,
can
I'm with you.
you can allude to that and then just go like to
Cut
me,
away.
yeah, to me, like a good example is Reservoir Dogs, where there's a scene where a character has their ear cut off.
That's a great movie. Reservoir
And
Dogs. That's a good film to bring up.
and you literally don't see any of it, but it
Nope.
is horrific.
Nope.
Like
You
it
don't
is
see any
horrific.
of it other than, the guy bleeding, the
Yeah,
other guy
yeah, yeah,
dancing with the ear, you
yeah.
know.
And you get all that because of the sounds,
Yeah.
because of kind of the pressure that's built up until
Hmm.
when he does it, the music that kind of kicks in really loud.
Yeah.
You get all that without seeing the shot at all. In fact, I've seen Tarantino talk about this. He argues that they showed the scene to a test audience where they you saw the ear being cut off and
Hmm.
removed, and the scene where you didn't was more effective and people were more
Not
engrossed.
surprised. I am not surprised. It's funny. I'm gonna shout out. Not that I really consider myself or us to necessarily be content creators,
Yeah,
because I think we do this more for ourselves and for our churches
yeah,
more than content. We're not monetized. We don't
sure.
make money on this, but I do want to shout out a content creator who I have been watching a lot of his videos recently, and he talked about this very idea recently. His handle is the real life fake wizard. Uh,
Of
and
course it is.
he really talks about a lot pop culture and movies and video games and things like that. But he talked about this whole idea of how the modern Hollywood is desensitizing people
Yeah,
to these kinds of things,
yeah,
and I mean, it shows in something like this. I can tell you it was a number of years ago, and I've mentioned this before. I like horror movies. I really do enjoy them. But certain ones I don't. And there was one I turned on, and, well, let's see what this is. It was called Midnight Meat Train. Okay, I remember the title of the film, but I don't remember the content because in the first 5 minutes, they're literally flaying this body a lot. And I went, I ain't watching that. I'm not watching it. So it's the same, I feel like it's the same sort of thing here that, this scene they could have just hinted at it.
yeah.
They didn't have to just kind of dive deep into that.
And again, even the Jimmys, I feel like could have been more interesting. Like I love the conversation between the head Jimmy, the original Jimmy, Sir Jimmy, I guess is what they called him,
Sir Jimmy, yeah.
and Ian the doctor. And
Hmm.
he has this negotiation with him because he's been telling the kids this story of Satan kind of leading all them, and
Right.
how he's described who Satan is. They see Dr. Ian with iodine all over him and kind of reddish skin and with all these bones, and they assume that's Satan.
Right. That's
And
old Nick. Old
that's
Nick.
old
Old
Nick.
Nick. Old
Yeah,
Nick.
old Nick.
Yeah.
And Sir Jimmy goes to Ian to basically say, okay, this is what they think of you. I need your help or I'm going to kill you. And that scene I thought was really powerful, well done. And I was kind of like, I would have liked a couple more of those scenes. Like, one of the things that I struggled with is I didn't get a lot of character development about why Jimmy is the way Jimmy is.
Right.
And to me, if you're going to have someone do something as ghastly as flaying people,
Well,
it helps
was
give me some
Jimmy not
background.
the son of the priest from the
Yeah,
previous movie,
he
right?
was. Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's all you got. He
yeah.
was the
That's all
son of
you
the
got.
priest from the previous movie, and that was it.
You got the fact that his father was was clearly mentally disabled, or
Hmm.
I shouldn't say mentally disabled. He
He was
clearly had
nuts.
he clearly had a mental health issue. We're going to be nice. A mental health issue.
Well, you be nice. I'm going to
Yes.
call him nuts.
And he believed that he was supposed to basically help God destroy everything by
Mhm.
bringing this plague in. Well, okay, that tells us something about Jimmy, but then you don't give us any character
There's
development
no development between there and what we get in this film.
except this one scene, which was really powerful about kind of how he's navigated and how he's kind of
Hmm.
created this community. And
Yeah.
I was like, I want more backstory. And the Sir Jimmy is the same guy from the vampire in Sinners. And
Oh,
so
okay.
Jack O'Connor. And so it was interesting seeing him in these two kind of films.
Hmm.
But I was like, I want a little, again, I felt like, I guess what I would say is I felt like there wasn't a lot of character development in this story, and
Yeah.
I would have liked to see more, I guess, is my,
I do want to say that it was interesting for me as a fan of popular culture to see that the surviving music of the apocalypse is Duran Duran and Iron Maiden.
yeah. I thought you, especially Iron Maiden, when he started saying,
I
I'm
loved
like, I'm
that.
like, somewhere Don's smiling.
That was my favorite part of the movie. Playing Iron Maiden. You know,
I mean, Ray Fiennes is amazing, but he usually is amazing in most
he
things.
always is. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I, I don't know.
I think
There was this,
I wanted more of the Samson character too. I
yes,
really
yeah,
did because there is a development story arc with him, but they never really explore it, you
yeah,
know. And even at the end, you're not really sure whether that's a completed arc or not.
yeah.
You know, you're kind of left hanging a little bit. Um, but
Yeah.
anyway, we should get into themes here.
Sure.
What do you want to talk about?
Um, I think a theme that was interesting to me, I know maybe underdeveloped, but still interesting to me was the idea of loss of innocence.
Hmm.
This idea
It
that
was Spike, right? Yeah.
Spike loses his innocence. You also wonder how Jimmy lost his. You know, like that's part of it.
Right.
You even have a sense of how, the doctor, Ian, has this wonderful speech about how he talks about, I remember the last time, it was actually with Sir Jimmy. I remember the end and how we, before all this, that we assumed that everything was kind of set in stone and our way of life was always going to be there. And like you also realize it was a moment of him realizing that we don't have control, that control is an illusion, and that was a loss of innocence for him, right? Um,
Hmm.
this kind of loss of innocence of who he is, who the world is, who the world's always going to be. And um, Christianity has an interesting role to play because we kind of come into being and existence when, for Jewish people, I mean, Christianity is a Jewish movement. That's how it started.
Right.
And it comes into being and kind of defines itself in a time period where the Jewish world gets turned upside down, and the temple is destroyed and Jerusalem is destroyed. Literally, the temple used to be talked about as the umbilical cord from earth to heaven.
Hmm.
And so Jewish life was centered in the temple, was centered around Jerusalem, and then the Romans in 70 destroy it, just completely destroy it, and destroy the temple. And Jews are kind of flailing, for lack of a better term, about what do we do now? And Christianity was one of those answers to what you do now. And so Christianity has always had this element of realizing its place is to kind of help people recognize that there can be a greater order than the chaos around them. And so I think in this movie I guess I wanted to see more of that because I liked those were the elements I liked about okay, what's Spike gonna do now? And how did Jimmy get to be who he is? And how lonely it must be being Dr. Ian and kind of losing the purpose of being in a world where you helped people and you took care of people as a doctor,
Right.
and then you don't have anybody to take care of because there's nobody around you. Like
Right. And even the real people who might need, your help are just kind of vile, I mean, it's such a again, it's such a shift in tone from the previous film,
yeah.
and I mean, I didn't particularly love the previous film. It was okay. This one I didn't like much at all, really. Because it just I don't know, it feels incomplete, and but like it was just trying to be so many things and never just succeeded at even one of them,
Yeah,
you know?
I I feel like a good complaint of this movie or a critique of it, I guess, is if you're gonna be a horror movie, be a horror movie. If you're gonna be kind of a critique of society and broken human relationships, be about that.
Hmm.
And I felt like there
Well,
was more.
I think you can do both
Yes, you
well.
absolutely can.
You can. They didn't.
It was almost like it almost felt like very siloed. Like
Yeah.
instead of going like, okay, how do we make a horror movie about isolation? Or how do we
Hmm.
make a horror movie about the evils of a disintegrating community? And let's weave that together. It was almost like, okay, over here we're going to do horror, and
Hmm.
now we're going to talk about community. And over here, we're going to talk about the loss of innocence. And it was almost like it was kind of siloed. Like this section's for this
Yeah.
section's for this.
Yeah. This cast of characters does this part, this cast does that part. And oh, and now we're going to bring them together, and then you just kind of seem to almost lose the plot, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, it was again, we're ranging off a little bit, but
Yeah.
but there was something that you wrote that I wanted to talk about. Oh, the whole peace and respite thing.
Yeah.
This was interesting. So part of the way that Dr. Ian controls Samson, who is an alpha, they say, he's the major zombie character, um, is morphine.
Yeah.
And he basically comes back like every day to get darted with morphine.
Yeah.
Um, and then, Dr. Ian darts himself with morphine. Well, I think he puts it in his mouth, but whatever, and kind of leans into that whole, sometimes you just want to let the world go away.
Yes.
Um, which one can understand from a certain perspective,
Absolutely.
but it ain't going away forever.
Yeah.
you know like we've all been in that place where we just want everything to go away, leave me the heck alone, I don't want to deal with it right now. And yet ultimately it all does come back, it doesn't just go away.
No.
And so that's to me that's really interesting to explore, because all of us get to that place. For those who don't know, I just had surgery last week on my foot, and I'm not allowed to put any weight on it. And so it's been an adjustment and it's been challenging. And, there's other things that are going on in my life. And I'm going, like, I just want to get done with all of this mess. So,
Yeah.
you know, I get it from that perspective, but ultimately, like I've got to push through and I've got to get to the other side of it. And so in the middle, what truly is, maybe this is the better question, what truly is our peace and respite?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because again, I don't know if this was in the mind of um, the writers or the director, but there seemed to be an interesting dimension of kind of loose, kind of unformed spirituality is good
Hmm.
and organized religion bad. You know,
Yeah, there was a sense of that because in that Sir Jimmy and Ian conversation, it was, well, one's a Satanist and the other is an atheist.
yeah. Well, and even you have a scene at the very end where, again, spoiler alert, Sir Jimmy is killed and he's crucified, and he's
Upside
crucified
down.
upside down, and he literally says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" before he dies. You
Right,
know, and I don't know. Again, you have kind of these wonderful moments about this idea of using narcotics to have a spiritual awakening is basically what Samson has, and you can even
right.
argue it's what Ian has, right? You know, um, and it was like it
And
was
did you
this.
get the sense that he was also using some sort of hallucinogen in
Yes,
that
yeah.
whole
Oh, yes,
the devil appears
yeah,
scene?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
But you get this. I mean, it was beautifully shot. It was kind of this idea of looking up at the stars and kind of melting away because
Hmm.
of the kind of the deep encounter of the spiritual that you're having.
Right.
And then it was kind of like, oh yeah, then there's that weird Christianity stuff, you know. And there was a part of me that's like, you understand that there are Christian mystics, right? You know,
Hmm.
you do understand there are literally people that look up at the stars and have hallucinogenic experiences, wrote them down, and they're called saints. Like that
Hmm.
those exist in the Christian tradition. And so this idea of kind of like unformed spirituality good and organized spirituality bad, I just hate that because
Yeah.
they come out of the same place. They really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And, unfortunately, I think I mean, just to go off on a little bit of a cultural aside, I guess, it seems to be a cultural thing to deconstruct,
Yeah.
particularly things like organized religion or institutions or whatever, and I, all right, I'm biased. I'm clergy. I'm Christian. So I'm not going to like that. But I think the other side of it, at least for me, is what is the end game in that? What's the point of deconstructing something that really has been the foundation of Western society?
Well, and I think I can't remember who said it, but I guess I would applaud their sentiment, which is it's completely okay to deconstruct stuff you were raised with and to kind of figure out what has meaning for you or what's working and what's not. But what we rarely
Personally, you
talk
mean
about,
personally?
sorry, what?
Do you mean personally?
Yeah, personally.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
But we rarely talk about the fact that most people reconstruct. And most people then go, okay, like this stuff isn't working, but what might work?
Mm-hmm.
And then they form something together or they join another expression of the religion or maybe another religion. But most people reconstruct, and we don't usually talk about how to help people when they're struggling or deconstructing. Okay, you don't have to leave the church. Let's talk about how you reconstruct it in a way that's more healthy and viable for who you are.
Yeah, and I tend to feel like if we as a society leaned heavily into the deconstruction of institutions and the deconstruction of formalized religion, what you end up with is the exact chaos you see in this film.
Yeah.
And I don't think I know anybody that genuinely wants to go there. Uh,
Well, I think a good way to frame it is like let's look at our society just in general. Most of us would say, man, our society in a lot of ways is really broken
sure.
and it needs to be rebuilt. But what I don't think we usually do is take the time to actually talk about, okay, how are we going to rebuild it? You know, okay, it's broken. Okay, things need to change. it's easy to complain and it's easy to identify the problems. It's much harder and less gratifying to take the time to say, okay, you don't like the Department of Education. Okay, great. How would you rebuild it?
Right.
You don't like Congress. Great. There's problems with Congress. Absolutely. Okay, how would you create a system of legislative government? You
Right.
know,
And that's interesting because I just saw a video today, I think. Um, Another creator, I'll shout out Liam out loud, but he was talking about how, so many of us tend to think of ourselves more in that heroic mold, right? Like if I was in 1930s Germany, I would have stood up to the Nazis. But he makes the comparison to a film that we reviewed recently, The Matrix.
yeah,
He says most of us put ourselves in the Neo role, when the reality is most of us would be more like Cypher,
yeah, oh
the
yeah,
one who chose to go back into the make believe world because it was more comfortable.
yeah. I recently talked about Bonhoeffer in a sermon, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and talked about his famous lectures on Christology he gave in, I want to say, 1939, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe 1937. But he basically, in a room full of people with Nazi pins, he was willing to say the church is going to save itself, or the church will only find stability if we embrace the Jewish Messiah. You know, and I told everybody, I said,
Wow.
you know, I would like to say I would stand in front of a room of full of Nazis and say we must follow the embodied Jewish savior. But the reality is, we remember Bonhoeffer because very few people actually did that.
Right.
Most
Right.
of us go, "Where's the Nazi pin?" and sit down. Like that's how most of us, what most of us do.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And that is a little bit of a sad commentary on our current culture. But it's funny, we who is it, Niemöller, who said, first they came for
Yeah,
the socialist, but I wasn't a socialist. And
yeah,
that we've heard that one. All of us as
yeah,
clergy have heard that one, right? Um, the question is, are we willing to be the ones that stand up and say no? There's that quote from from uh, Captain America,
yeah,
where he says something about, when the world tells you to move, no, I'm
yeah,
going to stand here, you move, that kind of thing. Um, but are we that brave?
yeah.
That's a
And
tough question.
and again, you have that moment in this movie where Ian was going to let the Jimmies kind of just go off into the sunset with
Hmm.
this idea of reinforcing uh, Sir Jimmy being the leader. And
Right.
then only when he realizes Spike's in the group does he go, no, 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 I have to help. And Spike asks him later, why did you do that? And he said, I feel like you've suffered enough. And that idea of Christians are called to stand in the midst sometimes of suffering and say no.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, at least Ian lived up to that. What's that adage? This current pop culture adage, I guess, either you live long enough to see yourself you become the hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
yeah,
At least he died a hero, right?
yeah, yeah,
But anyway, this is I mean, there's a lot of stuff we didn't get to in this film.
no, yeah,
And I don't know, in my heart of hearts, if this film is necessarily worthy of a really deep dive. I think we've covered a lot of the high spots.
yeah, we did.
And it's like I said, it's a challenging film because it just doesn't seem to really, I don't know, doesn't seem to hit its mark. Yeah.
I do resonate with the one thing you said about one of the content creators. I don't want to sound like a prude or an old man, but maybe I'm both. I don't understand why I don't understand why we have to show so much physical violence.
Yeah.
I don't understand why I need to see someone's skin ripped off or why, you know,
It,
like
it
I
it's
understand we need to talk about difficult things. I understand sometimes we need to show people doing evil actions, but I don't understand why I have to see it all.
right. It kind of pushes you back to maybe the old movies were better, which is a good segue into next week. As far
Oh,
as 28 years later, The Bone Temple goes,
yeah.
it's an R-rated horror film that's very kind of mixed signals. If you're into that, have at it. Um, it is my turn to pick now. When I picked 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
I went, we're going into our 250th anniversary of the country. So I'm going to start looking at those type of films like,
Okay.
um, you know, films that maybe celebrate the country, but, in some way also challenge us.
Sure.
So the one that really came to mind for me this week is a film called Born on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
It's from 1989. I believe it was Tom Cruise. Well, it was definitely Tom Cruise's first star-making role, wasn't it?
It was one of his. It was his bigger. I think the bigger thing was. I think it was his
Risky Business.
first nomination of
Yeah, okay.
Oscar nomination.
So I think maybe he did Risky Business before that, but it was
Yeah.
definitely a big star turn for
Yeah.
Tom Cruise in that film. And so let's take a look at that this week. It's on Amazon Prime. It's a, rental.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. It's an Oliver Stone film as well. So, and it definitely treads in some controversial territory.
Yep.
So we'll have some interesting stuff to dissect. Other than that, friends, we thank you for watching. Keep on finding God in the dark. We'll see you all next Friday. Take care and God bless. Bye now. Thanks again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast, friends. If you've made it here all the way to the end of the video, then obviously you find something that we're doing to be educational or informative, something valuable in this podcast. So we want to invite you to go ahead and share this with your friends, hit the like button, follow us for more of this. We publish every week at 10 a.m. on Friday mornings on YouTube. Shortly thereafter, you'll find us somewhere on Facebook. Until next Friday, keep on finding God in the dark. Thanks for watching. Bye now.